Independence Day. A trip to Boston. Mr. and Mrs. Ono visit Boston to see Mr. Ono's old friend. Hi, Hajime. Welcome to Boston. How have you been?
Fine, thank you. It's great to see you again, Billy.
How was the traffic?
Not bad. It was about a 4-hour drive from New York. This is my wife, Yoshiko. Yoshiko, this is Billy Reed.
I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Reed.
Please, call me Billy.
Japanese people don't usually address people by their first names, especially superiors. Yoshiko, when I was a college student, I stayed at Billy's home for nearly a month. Billy's ancestors were Puritans who settled in New England in the 17th century.
What is a Puritan?
Well, in colloquial language, a Puritan is a person who has very strict morals. In history, the Puritans were English people who disagreed with official religious practices. The Puritans left England and settled in America because they wanted to worship without interference.
Didn't they travel to America on a ship called the Mayflower?
Oh, you know a little about American history.
Don't be silly. I was good at history. But my knowledge of colonial America is limited.
Most Japanese people know a little about American history, and only a few understand it well.
Few Americans understand their history completely.
But you know quite a bit, Billy. I've learned a lot of American history from you. I hope you'll be able to teach Yoshiko a few things too.
I'd love to learn more about how America started.
Okay, well, in 1620, the Mayflower reached Plymouth, a harbor 30 miles southeast of Boston. 10 years later, in 1630, the Puritans founded Boston, which soon grew into an important port.
Harvard is one of the most prestigious universities in America. In the 17th century, Harvard's educational purpose was to provide ministers for Puritan communities.
That means Harvard existed before America's independence?
Yes, it's America's oldest university and was founded in 1636.
I didn't know that.
Boston is also one of the oldest cities in America. Many old brick buildings and stone pavements still remain. Some parts of Boston look like a British town.
Did any people other than the British immigrate to America?
Yes, of course. New York was purchased from the Native Americans by the Dutch. Its original name was New Amsterdam. I heard they bought it from a tribe for a box of cheap trading goods.
That's true, but the Native Americans who sold Manhattan to the Dutch didn't own the land. Another tribe lived there. New York's first real estate deal was a swindle.
That's funny, but a lot of history has been filled with dishonesty. How did the British acquire New York?
The British conquered New Amsterdam from the Dutch in the mid-17th century and renamed it New York. Britain fought many wars against France to protect New York and other American colonies, like Boston. Britain won these wars, but they were very costly. The British government imposed taxes on the colonies to help pay for the wars.
These taxes caused a lot of resentment in the colonies, right?
Yes, taxes were an important factor in the War of Independence. That's what motivated the movement toward independence. There are many historic spots in Boston that relate to the colonial period and the War of Independence. The Freedom Trail is a route through Boston along which there are many historical sites. It's not a long walk, only a few miles. I will take you to the ship where the Boston Tea Party occurred.
Did you say the Boston Tea Party?
Yes, in 1773, Britain restricted free trade in the colonies by giving the East India Company a monopoly on imported tea. Angry American colonists disguised themselves as Native Americans and boarded a British trading ship. They dumped as many as 340 tea chests into the harbor. The costumes they wore were meant to be a joke. Everyone knew the men were Americans. Because of this incident, the name Tea Party was acquired. Before this incident, there was a clash between British soldiers and Bostonians. It was called the Boston Massacre, and 5 citizens were killed. Let's go see the ship, and then we'll go to Lexington and Concord. It's less than an hour by car. The Onos and Mr. Reed arrive in Lexington.
What beautiful country.
The War of Independence started in this area.
This is one of the old battlefields of the American Revolution.
American Revolution?
It's another name for the War of Independence.
Americans in this area formed improvised military forces to fight the British. They were prepared to fight within 1 minute, so they were called Minutemen. This is Northbridge. Here's where Americans and British clashed and the Revolutionary War began. It occurred in 1775. The war lasted for 6 years. Most fighting ended in 1781. Britain and America made peace in 1783.
Wait, I learned that America became independent in 1776.
In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was announced. The 4th of July is celebrated as Independence Day.
I see. The Declaration of Independence was not the end of the war.
That's right, and the general of the revolutionary troops was George Washington, who became our first president.
America's first president was a military man?
Washington commanded troops, but he was not a professional soldier. Washington was a rich aristocrat who owned black slaves who worked on his farms. The Declaration of Independence was drafted by Thomas Jefferson, the third president, and others. The opening is very famous. It declares liberty and equality to be the principles of our nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote those words, also owned slaves. Equality has not always been given to all Americans. In the 18th century, African Americans were not considered equal. The founders of America were men of their time.
I see. Is God the creator?
Yes, they believe that. The majority of the founders were Protestant Christians. They were religious men, but they wanted the government to be separate from religion.
Is it totally separated?
No, there are some connections. Our dollar bills have "In God We Trust" printed on them. And our president is always sworn into office with his hand on the Bible in his inauguration ceremony.
My image of America is as a society without strong religious beliefs.
Some parts of America may give this impression, but many rural areas are rather conservative.
Billy, what is the American definition of freedom?
I think everyone has a different definition of freedom.
What do you mean?
Most Americans believe that personal freedom should not be restricted unless it becomes harmful to others. But different people have different definitions of what is harmful. Abortion is an excellent example. Some people believe that abortion is a woman's right. Other people say it's murder. But everyone agrees that both sides of the debate are free to express their opinion. American law protects the freedom to express political views, and democracy protects those laws. This concept was very important to the men who founded the American government.
What is equality?
The idea that all people are equal under the law, despite their differences.
I think that idea is more important than all the historic sites in Boston.
Unlike you, most people only see the surface, not the underlying ideas. If you can grasp the deeper meaning of American history, then you understand it well.